I never thought a Monday morning could feel so heavy, so alive, so dangerously quiet. The city stretched before me like a giant canvas. Skyscrapers bleeding sunlight into the streets. A million stories playing out in glass reflections. And there I was, Zaria Mitchell, in heels too sharp, carrying my coffee like armor, striding past the lobby of Hartwell Co. Midtown. The polished marble floor gleamed under my steps, echoing like a metronome, tick, 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 measuring each heartbeat that had already decided the rhythm of today. I paused for a moment, hand brushing against the cold metal of the revolving door. Outside, taxis honked and pedestrians collided with their own hurried destinies, unaware of the storm about to break within these walls. I smiled faintly, a private, quiet curve of lips that only I would see, and whispered, "All right, Z, time to show them who you are. Not what they think you are. Who you truly are." Inside, the office smelled like ambition, polished wood, and faint traces of someone's expensive perfume. The kind of scent that clung to your nostrils. A reminder that power has a smell, and it's intoxicating. But fleeting. I adjusted my blazer, straightened my posture, and stepped onto the elevator. My reflection catching my eye in the mirrored walls. Zaria Mitchell. Black, female, unapologetic, and entirely underestimated. 10 years. 10 years navigating this building like a minefield of whispered rumors. Microaggressions folded neatly between smiles. And invisible ceilings that threatened to collapse the moment you reached for them. I had been the quiet observer. The diligent worker. The one who stayed late cleaning up mistakes no one else would touch. And now, the world wanted to see if I could keep my composure when the game changed. The elevator dinged and opened to the 12th floor. My heels clicked against the carpeted hallway. A rhythm that drew eyes without intention. I could feel the stares before I even entered my office, some filled with envy, some with cautious respect, and others, I knew, simmering with resentment. I passed a group of younger black women in the break room, their faces lit by fluorescent light and the glow of laptops. Catching snippets of conversation about Zaria's big move, I gave them a nod, almost imperceptible, but in that moment, I felt the weight of representation. They were watching, they were learning, and I had to be flawless, or at least, flawless enough to survive. Sliding into my chair, I placed my coffee on the corner of the desk. The mug bore the faint cracks of 10 years of use, a testament to survival, endurance, and quiet victories. I opened my laptop, and the glow of the screen illuminated the contours of my face, highlighting the tension in my jaw, the determined set of my shoulders. Emails poured in, a steady stream of corporate demands, requests, and subtle tests, each one a reminder that power is not given, it's wrestled from the hands of the unprepared. The hum of the office was a symphony of quiet wars, keyboards clacking like rifles in the trenches, phones buzzing like distant artillery, and muted conversations masking the undercurrents of strategy and betrayal. I inhaled deeply, imagining the invisible threads that connected each colleague's ambition, each whispered plan that sought to undermine me. And I felt the familiar thrill of the hunt. I remembered Marcus, my former mentor, now subtly turned rival. He was walking toward the break room, talking animatedly with a cluster of managers. His laughter, rich and smooth, filled the space, but I could see the flicker of condescension beneath it, the faint lift of an eyebrow that said, "She'll never get there." That eyebrow had been a challenge for years. Every smirk, every encouraging critique, every moment meant to test my patience and skill. It was all leading here. My phone buzzed with a message from my closest ally in the office. "Lana, heads up, they're gunning for you this week. Watch your back." I read it twice, then set the phone down with deliberate calm. I let the words sink in, not as fear, but as fuel. Betrayal is a shadow that always follows those who dare to climb. And I had learned long ago to dance with shadows. The walls of my office seemed to close in, not with threat, but with anticipation. I ran a hand over the smooth surface of my desk, tracing the scratches like constellations. A map of every late night, every small victory, every invisible fight that had brought me here. I thought of my grandmother, a woman whose hands had carried more than mine ever would, whose voice still echoed in my memory. "Baby, they can't dim your light. Not if you keep it alive inside. I looked out the window. Midtown sprawled below, cars weaving through the arteries of the city like currents of fate. And I thought, today isn't about survival, it's about claiming. Claiming respect, claiming my voice, claiming the narrative that had been denied to me for too long. The intercom buzzed, a soft chime that called everyone to the morning briefing. I smoothed my skirt, lifted my chin, and stood. The conference room doors loomed ahead, glass and steel reflecting the morning light. I took a step forward, and then another, the heels against tile marking the countdown to confrontation. Every eye in that room, every subtle glance, every half smile, would meet me, and I would not flinch. This was more than a Monday morning. It was the calm before the storm, the quiet before the lightning strikes. And in that calm, I could feel the electricity humming under my skin, the promise of change. The tension of exposure, the intoxicating thrill of turning the tables. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Time to move, I whispered, my reflection in the glass doors staring back at me like a twin who had endured the same battles, fought the same wars, and refused to surrender. The doors slid open, and the office embraced me like a stage set for war. And I walked in, fully aware that everything I had prepared for would start today. Because Zaria Mitchell doesn't just survive. Zaria claims. Zaria conquers. And if anyone doubted it, well, today they would see exactly why. The conference room smelled like polished wood and overbrewed coffee. A scent that somehow smelled like power and anxiety all at once. Chairs clattered softly as people shuffled in, murmurs folding over one another. Like a low tide of anticipation. I walked in last, letting my presence settle like a subtle weight, letting the room feel it before my words did. Zaria Mitchell. They thought they knew me, but they didn't. Not fully, not yet. Marcus was already there, leaning back, smirking at something only he thought was funny. He had that familiar arrogance, the kind of smile that says, I've beaten you before, and I can do it again. I felt the familiar coil of tension twist in my chest, a mix of anger and determination. I took my seat, aligning my papers, my laptop open, coffee untouched, because moments like this, coffee was a luxury I didn't have time for. Good morning, I said, voice calm, precise, like a scalpel cutting through the low hum of pre-meeting chatter. Heads turned, eyes narrowing, scanning me, evaluating. I let the silence linger just long enough. Power thrives in the spaces between words. The meeting began. Numbers, projections, KPIs. They rolled across the screen like a river I had to navigate carefully. I listened, nodding, taking notes, but my mind was elsewhere, dissecting every glance, every subtle jab, every half smile meant to undermine me. They were trying to predict my moves, to see if I'd crack. But I'd learned long ago that the only person whose expectations mattered was my own. Halfway through the presentation, I caught a whispered exchange between Marcus and Clara. His assistant, a glance. A subtle roll of eyes. The kind of small acts meant to isolate. To make me doubt my own place. I felt it all, each micro moment, like tiny arrows aimed at my confidence. But instead of flinching, I leaned back, letting the perception settle in. And I made a silent note. Every action has a reaction. Every betrayal a consequence. Later, as the meeting adjourned, people filed out with polite smiles. Nods of respect that felt more like caution than sincerity. Marcus lingered. Zaria, can we talk? His tone was smooth, inviting, but the edge beneath it was clear. I followed him to the hallway, letting the camera of my mind capture the polished floors. The fluorescent lights flickering. The distant hum of city life pressing against the glass walls. Your last project, impressive, he said, words coated in syrupy charm. But you know the higher-ups, they're questioning the approach. Might be risky. I looked at him, eyes sharp. Risky for who, Marcus? Certainly not for the people who actually do the work. I assume. My voice was measured, calm, but every syllable carried the weight of years of overlooked effort. He smiled. Thin and knowing, as if he'd already won. Just a heads up, can't be too careful in this environment. I nodded, letting the words wash over me, dissecting them later, analyzing every nuance. Betrayal isn't loud, it's subtle, calculated, often invisible until it's too late. Back at my desk, I reviewed the numbers for the project that had been my crown jewel. The work that had gone unnoticed in the past but now threatened by whispers and hidden agendas. Each spreadsheet, each data point, each chart became a weapon in my mind. I wasn't just defending my project. I was preparing to expose the rot in the system that had held me and countless others back for too long. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Lana. They're setting traps. Keep your head down but eyes open. You've got this. I smiled, feeling a wave of quiet solidarity. The weight of representation wasn't just mine. It belonged to every black woman in the office. Every colleague who had ever been underestimated, overlooked, or silenced. By mid-afternoon, the tension was palpable. Emails came with veiled threats, meeting invites with hidden agendas, and whispered comments that dripped with doubt. I leaned back in my chair, letting the hum of the office become a soundtrack, my mind running scenarios like a chessboard in slow motion. Each player had a role, each piece a predictable move, but I was the one who would write the checkmate. And then came the moment that shifted everything. A leaked memo, intentionally misdirected, landed in my inbox. The words, carefully constructed to undermine me, felt like a slap. But I let the sting fuel me instead of breaking me. I read it twice, 3 times, dissecting the language, the intent, and the hidden hands behind it. This wasn't a mistake. This was war. I closed my eyes, feeling the pulse of my heartbeat echo in my ears. The city buzzing faintly through the glass. My grandmother's voice whispered again. They can't stop what they don't understand. Baby, and they'll never understand your fire. I opened my eyes, steady, unflinching. I didn't respond immediately. Patience was a weapon, timing a strategy. I would turn this attempt to undermine me into the very leverage I needed to rise. By late afternoon, the office was quieter, shadows stretching across cubicles, the glow of monitors reflecting determination and exhaustion in equal measure. I leaned back, letting the soft hum of computers, the occasional printer, and the distant city sirens become my meditation. Every sound, every flicker of light, every subtle glance from colleagues became a part of the narrative I was constructing, the story of Zaria Mitchell. Black, unapologetic, and unbreakable. And just before leaving, I drafted a message to my team. A mix of encouragement and strategy, ending with a subtle nudge to remind them of their own strength. Keep pushing. Keep shining. And remember, you're not just surviving this, you're claiming it. Because that's what today had taught me. Survival is no longer enough. Claiming your space, asserting your voice, exposing the truth. This was the currency of power. I gathered my things, my mind buzzing with strategy, anticipation, and the quiet thrill of impending confrontation. Walking out, the city lights reflected off the glass, the hum of the streets mingling with my own heartbeat. And I knew, without a shadow of doubt, that tomorrow, the storm would be real, and I would be ready. Like if you stand for fairness, share to empower your community, comment your story, let's rise together. Because Zaria Mitchell doesn't just navigate the office, she transforms it. And every black woman watching knows exactly what that feels like. The office had a rhythm by now, one that pulsed like a heartbeat only I could feel. Keyboards clicked, phones buzzed, fluorescent lights hummed, a soundtrack of ambition and subtle malice. Every corner hid conversations I wasn't meant to overhear. And yet I did, absorbing them like a sponge, storing every nuance for later. In this place, knowledge was power, perception was currency, and betrayal wore 1,000 disguises. I slid into my desk chair, the leather cool against my palms, my laptop already alive with notifications. One email stood out, a misdirected praise meant for Clara, a small victory for Marcus. Or so they thought. I read it slowly, letting the words linger, dissecting the underlying intention. It was an opening, and I didn't miss it. I recalled my grandmother's words, the ones that had guided me through every storm, whispered over Sunday dinners and quiet phone calls. Don't just play the game. Zaria, learn it, bend it, own it. I smiled faintly. Today, that lesson would guide me. By mid-morning, I had mapped out the first move. Subtle, invisible, an email to the board, CCing the right eyes, carefully phrased to highlight successes. hint at misalignments, and question the accuracy of the misdirected praise. It was like threading a needle. Each word calculated, each phrase a tool. The digital hum of the office felt almost musical as I pressed send, knowing the ripples would spread before anyone even realized the water had been stirred. The first reaction came sooner than expected. Marcus's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, brow furrowed, a brief twitch of panic flashing across his usually smug face. Clara caught it too, eyes widening as she realized the subtle shift. They were underestimating me, assuming my silence was weakness. But silence is a strategy, observation, a weapon. By lunchtime, whispers of curiosity had begun to circulate. I ate at my desk, salad untouched, coffee growing cold, while I watched their movements like a hawk. Every glance, every casual comment, every carefully measured smile was a piece of the puzzle. I wasn't just surviving the office politics, I was orchestrating them. And then came the meeting. Marcus strutted in, carrying the weight of imagined control like a crown. But today, the room felt different. Eyes lingered on me, hesitant, a little wary. I caught snippets of conversation. The soft murmurs. Did you see the report Zaria sent? She's confident. Confidence. Yes, but beneath that, patience and precision. The kind that doesn't just wait for opportunity, it manufactures it. Zaria, your report, Marcus began, voice smooth, practiced, but faltering under the subtle shifts in attention. I met his gaze evenly, unflinching, letting him feel the power of quiet authority. Yes, I compiled the data, highlighted trends, and cross-referenced projections. I also noted areas that might need clarification before presentation to the executive team. My voice was steady, authoritative, and layered with a calm he couldn't penetrate. The room went quiet, even the air seemed to pause. Watching, Marcus's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of unease. I could feel it, a small victory that felt large. It wasn't loud, it wasn't explosive, it was subtle, cinematic, the kind of moment that echoes long after the doors close. Back at my desk, the chessboard expanded. I had allies, unseen but present: Lana, who had been my whispering partner in strategy; Jerome, whose understanding of the company hierarchy was uncanny. Quietly, methodically, we began weaving a network of influence. Small victories building into momentum. Every nod of recognition, every quiet acknowledgement of my contributions, added layers to the unfolding story. By mid-afternoon, the tension thickened. Marcus tried to intercept, sending back emails with loaded suggestions, thinly veiled criticisms. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I collected evidence, built clarity, and positioned each piece of information as leverage. Every misstep they made would now fuel my ascent. The city beyond the office windows seemed to pulse in sync with my own heartbeat. The streets alive with life, energy, and ambition. I imagined the skyline as a mirror of my own aspirations, tall, commanding, and unapologetic. The hum of traffic, the distant sirens, the chatter of pedestrians, it all became part of the cinematic soundscape. The background to the drama unfolding within the glass walls. Late afternoon brought the first confrontation. Clara cornered me by the printer. Her tone casual but sharp. Zaria, I saw your email to the board. Her words were meant to unsettle, to insinuate threat. I met her gaze. Calm, measured. I ensure my work is visible, accurate, and impactful. You should try it sometime. The subtle sting of truth lingered as she walked away, silence stretching in her wake. As I returned to my desk, the hum of fluorescent lights mixing with the faint rattle of the city, I realized something crucial. This wasn't just about me. It was about every black woman who had ever been overlooked, underestimated, or sidelined. Every small act of assertion, every carefully crafted move, became part of a larger narrative, a story of resilience, strategy, and unapologetic presence. By the time I packed my bag for the evening, the office had settled into a quiet hum. Shadows stretched across cubicles, computers blinked, and the faint scent of leftover coffee lingered. I paused, taking it all in, letting the day's victories, quiet though they were, sink in. The chessboard was set, the pieces in motion, and the game was far from over. And as I stepped into the evening light, the city reflecting off the glass like molten gold. I drafted a short note to my team, reinforcing our strategy, our resilience, our collective power. Trust your instincts. Own your space. And remember, we rise together. Like if you stand for empowerment. Share to inspire your community. Comment your story. Let's strategize and succeed together. Because Zaria Mitchell wasn't just navigating corporate politics, she was rewriting the rules. And every black office worker watching would recognize that familiar, hard-won thrill. The moment when patience, insight, and courage intersect, and the game finally begins to turn in your favor. Morning light spilled across the midtown skyline, streaking gold and orange over the glass towers like it was painting a stage for the day's drama. I walked into the office with my heels clicking against the marble floors. The sound echoing down the corridor, commanding, deliberate, unyielding. Today was different. Today, the tide would shift, and I would set the currents in motion. The tension was tangible. You could feel it in the air. The slight stiffness of shoulders. The measured way people greeted each other. Even the hum of computers seemed slower. Deliberate, as if the office itself was holding its breath. Marcus sat at his desk, sprawled in his chair like he owned the space. But I noticed the small telltale signs, the tightening of his jaw. The flicker of unease when our eyes met. He didn't know I had already begun drawing lines in this game. Unseen but deadly precise. My laptop chimed, a subtle ping breaking the quiet. An anonymous tip had landed in my inbox overnight, detailing some discrepancies in Marcus's recent reports. Nothing overt, nothing that could be traced back to me yet, but enough to plant a seed. I leaned back, eyes narrowing, letting the information settle. Every detail mattered. The right move at the right time could unravel weeks of his confident manipulation. By mid-morning, the office rhythm had changed. Whispered conversations floated through the cubicles. Eyes flicking toward me, uncertain. Clara, still recovering from yesterday's subtle confrontation, avoided direct contact, but I could feel her watching from across the room. Her movements were predictable now, hesitation mixed with residual fear. That fear was a tool. One I would wield without cruelty. Only the precision of strategy. I moved through the day like a conductor guiding an orchestra. Each gesture, each word, each nod measured. I stopped by Jerome's desk for a quick check-in, sharing the latest insight about Marcus's vulnerabilities. Timing, I said softly, is everything. One wrong move and we lose the board. But if we strike carefully. I left the sentence hanging, letting the weight of possibility settle in his mind. He nodded, understanding without question. The board meeting approached. It loomed over the office like a storm front. Heavy and inevitable. I reviewed my talking points. Each phrase honed to highlight competence, subtly expose flaws, and position myself as indispensable. My palms were steady, heart pulsing, a rhythm synced with the city outside. Alive with energy. The hum of traffic below became a soundtrack. A cinematic underscore to the unfolding drama. As the meeting began, I felt the room shift. Marcus opened with his usual charm, smiling like he was untouchable. But the room's energy betrayed him. Eyes darted toward me during discussions. Recognizing the subtle authority I now projected, I spoke only when necessary. Each word deliberate, weighted, cinematic. I've noticed some trends in the projections that may require clarification, I said, voice calm but piercing. I've outlined them in detail for the board's review, ensuring transparency and alignment. A flicker of panic crossed Marcus's face, so brief it could be missed. But I caught it. The tide was turning. Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. She knew the narrative was shifting. Even the junior analysts in the room looked toward me, a subtle nod of respect in their eyes. The undercurrent of office politics had shifted. I wasn't just present, I was pivotal. By lunch, whispers had spread further. My small victories were becoming visible threads in a larger web. People approached me quietly, sharing insights and observations. Each new piece of information was fuel, adding to the momentum I was building. It wasn't just about strategy, it was about visibility, recognition, and reclaiming agency in a space that had often ignored women like me. Later in the afternoon, Marcus attempted a counterattack. A sharply worded email arrived, insinuating incompetence. questioning my findings. Thinly veiled threats disguised as professional courtesy. I read it carefully, the hum of the office around me fading into a background blur. I could feel my pulse. Steady and controlled, the calm before the next move. I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I documented, cross-referenced, and prepared a response that was factual, firm, and impossible to misinterpret. Every glance around the office reinforced the growing narrative. People were watching, evaluating, realizing the game had changed. I could feel the cultural weight of my presence. The echoes of every black woman who had ever been sidelined, underestimated, or overlooked. Their resilience, their intelligence, their quiet determination. Their stories pulsed in my veins. I was playing for more than myself. I was representing every voice that deserved to be heard in this space. As the day waned, I met briefly with Lana in the stairwell. A quiet sanctuary amid the corporate storm. "They're nervous," she whispered. "The shift is happening faster than we imagined." I nodded, internalizing the truth. Control wasn't a show of force. It was a symphony of strategy, patience, and timing. Every move mattered. Every action was amplified by perception. By the time I packed my bag, the office had quieted, shadows stretching long across the floors. Marcus sat alone, tapping at his phone with growing frustration. Clara lingered near her desk, hesitant, unsure, and I walked out into the evening air, the city lights reflecting in the glass like tiny points of possibility. My victory today was subtle, unseen by many, but monumental to the game's trajectory. Before leaving, I sent a brief, strategic message to my allies. Observe, record, prepare. Momentum is ours. Even in the quiet of the evening, the city seemed to pulse in agreement. A cinematic backdrop to the ongoing corporate ballet. Like, if you believe in resilience, share to empower someone in the struggle. Comment your story. Let's turn tides together. I knew this was just the beginning. Marcus would try again. Clara would regroup. But for the first time, the balance had shifted, and Zaria Mitchell was no longer a participant in this corporate drama. She was its orchestrator, its strategist, its quiet but unstoppable force. The morning air was thick with humidity, pressing against my skin as I walked into the building. My reflection in the mirrored glass doors was sharp, unflinching. Zaria Mitchell, a black woman navigating corridors of power that had never quite been built for people like me. My heels clicked like a metronome, marking the rhythm of determination that no one else could hear. The tension in the office was palpable, each glance and whispered word carrying an undercurrent of unease. I had sensed it for days. Marcus's composure was faltering. His usual smooth charm had begun to crack under the weight of scrutiny. But I knew better than to underestimate him. In this game, the smallest misstep could become a weapon against me. I kept my movements deliberate, my expressions neutral, the way a chess master positions pieces while hiding the strategy in plain sight. At my desk, a folder awaited me, a printed report that had appeared on my chair without a note. I opened it cautiously. The contents made my stomach tighten, my pulse quicken. Marcus had been siphoning client accounts, redirecting revenue streams to personal ventures, and covering it with layers of fabricated documentation. The betrayal wasn't just professional, it was a personal attack on my credibility, my integrity, and the culture of accountability I had been trying to uphold. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes for a moment. The office buzz faded to a dull hum, replaced by the sound of my own breath. Memories of late nights spent mentoring young black employees, advocating for equitable recognition, flashed before me. Every moment of fighting for visibility, every instance of being doubted, every time I had swallowed indignation to survive, all of it converged here. The fight wasn't just mine. It was for every woman in this building who had ever been erased, overlooked, or dismissed. Jerome approached quietly, sensing the shift. "Zaria, you look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a small, controlled smile. "Something like that. It's worse." I laid the folder on the table, showing him the evidence without speaking. His eyes widened. He had always been a quiet ally, observant and calculating, and I knew immediately he would understand the implications without me needing to explain. By mid-morning, the office had transformed into a pressure cooker. Marcus moved through the space like a storm cloud, attempting to mask fear with bravado. He stopped by my desk, leaning casually, trying to read me, but the smile I returned was unyielding. A mirror reflecting nothing but the certainty of exposure. I had called an emergency board review. It was unusual, and it drew attention, more eyes, more anticipation. I presented the data carefully, my voice calm but resolute, letting the facts speak with cinematic precision. Each slide, each chart, each document peeled back a layer of deception, exposing a pattern of misconduct that Marcus had spent months constructing. As I spoke, I watched his reactions, the fleeting glance downward, the subtle tightening of his jaw, the brief hesitation in his answers when questioned by senior management. The betrayal that had been hidden in plain sight was now laid bare. Undeniable and meticulous. I didn't gloat, didn't raise my voice. I let the room absorb the gravity of truth, letting the silence stretch and settle like dust after a storm. Clara sat across the table, her expression unreadable. I wondered what she had known, and how much she had been complicit. The tension between us had shifted from cautious rivalry to fragile truce. Each of us calculating survival in the aftermath of revelation. Even in her silence, I could sense the reckoning she felt, a mirror of the doubt and fear that Marcus now carried. The CEO leaned back, steepled fingers under his chin. "Zaria, this is serious," he said, voice measured. "I need complete transparency on every account and every transaction you've outlined here." His tone was not accusatory but deliberate, commanding, as if weighing the weight of institutional justice against the personal drama unfolding. I nodded, already knowing that the work ahead would be grueling, but necessary. As the meeting adjourned, Marcus retreated to his office. I followed, needing to see him, to confront the source of betrayal directly. When our eyes met, there was no mask left. His charm, his arrogance, even his carefully constructed facade of control had dissolved into something raw: fear, frustration, and an unspoken recognition of my power. "I underestimated you," he said quietly, voice tense. "I didn't think you'd find out." "I didn't just find out," I replied, calm, steady, unwavering. "I've been watching. I've been documenting. And I won't let you manipulate this space any longer." The words weren't a threat, they were a boundary, an unbreakable assertion of authority. The office around us seemed suspended, every detail amplified, the fluorescent lights flickering subtly, the hum of the ventilation system, the distant click of keyboards. The city outside was indifferent, but inside, history was being written. A black woman had risen from the background, not with spectacle or aggression, but with precision, intellect, and unyielding integrity. As I returned to my desk, I felt the weight of the day settle on my shoulders, but it was lighter than it had been in years. Marcus's betrayal had been revealed. Yes, but more than that, the culture of fear he had relied upon was crumbling. My colleagues approached quietly, offering subtle nods of support, the beginning of an unspoken coalition forming. I knew this was only the turning point. The aftermath would be messy, complicated, and fraught with challenges, but the path forward was clear. I would navigate it as I always had, with calculated steps, strategic patience, and the quiet certainty that integrity, when wielded wisely, was a force no deception could withstand. As I looked out across the city skyline, I imagined the countless black women who had walked similar paths in spaces not designed for us. Their resilience pulsed through me, a steady undercurrent of strength. Today, the betrayal had been unmasked. Tomorrow, the work of transformation would begin. And for the first time in months, I allowed myself a small, private smile. The tide was turning, and I was steering the course. The city lights outside the office were like a constellation of expectations, each one reflecting the weight of the decision I was about to make. I sat in the small, glass-encased conference room, fingers interlaced over the edge of the polished oak table. My reflection in the window merged with the skyline, and for a moment, I saw not just myself, but every black woman who had ever had her voice muted, her authority questioned, her presence minimized in the corridors of corporate power. This was more than a confrontation with Marcus or the rotten framework he had built. It was a reckoning with Redwood itself. The company's public image, meticulously curated and polished, was now dangling on the edge of exposure. And I held the evidence. My heart beat with the tension of a tightrope walker, knowing that every step would be scrutinized, every word analyzed. The media had arrived early, their cameras and microphones filling the room with mechanical hums and subtle vibrations. Flashing lights punctuated the otherwise sterile environment, painting the walls in stark white and blue. Reporters leaned forward, pens ready, lenses focused. I felt the familiar sting of being observed, of being evaluated not just as a professional, but as a black woman in a system that rarely let people like me occupy the center stage. The board members entered, their expressions carefully neutral. Clara, sitting near the end of the table, avoided my gaze, perhaps realizing that the dynamic had shifted irreversibly. Marcus entered last, trying to project calm confidence. But the tremor in his hand betrayed him. The room contracted around us, each breath heavy, charged with expectation. I cleared my throat. The moment demanded precision, and I would not allow emotions to undermine the power of truth. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, voice steady but firm, "what you're about to see is not a matter of opinion. It's a matter of documented evidence, meticulous accounting, and the integrity of this organization." The room was silent, save for the quiet hum of equipment. I started with the overview, charts, transaction logs, internal emails, layering the narrative so that each revelation landed like a carefully aimed arrow. The cinematic rhythm of the presentation, pauses, shifts, and emphasis, allowed each fact to resonate. The betrayal, once hidden, now became undeniable. Marcus attempted interruptions, subtle but calculated, but I anticipated each maneuver. "Excuse me," I said, eyes locking on him. "Your time for explanation will come. But first, let's examine the facts." The clarity of the phrase, delivered without aggression, carried a weight that no charm or manipulation could counter. Flashbulbs popped. The journalists scribbled furiously, capturing not just the data, but the drama, the human story within corporate walls. I could feel the tension vibrating through the room. Every colleague, every board member, every journalist was witnessing a moment that would redefine authority, accountability, and the role of a black woman standing unwavering in her truth. Clara finally spoke, her voice hesitant, but audible over the tension. "Zaria, this is overwhelming." I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. Her words were acknowledgement enough. A subtle sign that the internal networks of complicity had been disrupted. The CEO's tone cut through the room. Steady, deliberate. "This is unprecedented. Zaria, your diligence and courage have brought a matter to light that we cannot ignore. Redwood will take immediate steps to ensure transparency, compliance, and reform." I felt the subtle tremor of relief in my chest, but it was tempered by the knowledge that reform would not come easy. Systems had been corrupted, trust violated, and rebuilding would demand more than good intentions. It would require structural change, oversight, and vigilance. Marcus leaned back, defeated yet defiant. His charm no longer shielded him. The illusion of control had dissipated. You're relentless," he said, almost a whisper. "I'm accountable," I replied, "to the truth, to this organization, and to every voice that has been silenced." The words were more than a statement, they were a declaration of moral authority. An assertion that integrity could be wielded as a weapon against deception. The board decided immediately on independent audits, public disclosures, and new oversight committees. Policies would be rewritten, roles reassigned, accountability enforced. I sat back, observing the ripple effect, the subtle nods of colleagues, the tentative smiles of former allies now emboldened, the quiet recognition that the tide had shifted. The press conference that followed was cinematic. Standing before cameras, with the skyline behind me like a backdrop of infinite possibility, I spoke not just as a whistleblower, but as a representative of every person whose diligence and ethics had ever been ignored. I felt the cultural weight of the moment, the eyes of black professionals. Women in every corner of the city, watching, learning, drawing strength from someone who had walked through betrayal and emerged not just intact, but transformed. I didn't need to dramatize the story. The facts themselves carried the power. Each statistic, each misstep exposed, each acknowledgement of wrongdoing was a victory. But the real triumph was internal. The reclamation of narrative, of dignity, of self-worth. As I left the conference room, the city lights reflected in my eyes. I allowed myself to breathe, to absorb the gravity of what had just transpired. Marcus and Redwood had been held accountable. But the most profound shift was in me. The acknowledgement that I could navigate power structures with intelligence, grace, and unyielding integrity. Walking down the street afterward, the sounds of the city, honking taxis, distant conversations, the low hum of nightlife, felt amplified. Each step was a rhythm of resilience. A cadence of someone who had not only survived corporate betrayal but had leveraged it to instigate meaningful reform. And in that moment, I realized, true power isn't about fear, intimidation, or control. True power is the ability to illuminate the truth, enforce accountability, and catalyze change, not just for oneself, but for the people whose voices have long been silenced. The story wasn't over. Reform would be messy like growth, like evolution, but the path forward was clear. And I, Zaria Mitchell, would walk it, relentless, resolute, and unafraid. The morning air was electric as I walked into Redwood's Midtown headquarters. Each step echoed against the polished floors, a staccato beat of determination. The city outside continued its relentless rhythm, oblivious to the storm I carried within. But inside me, everything had shifted. Today wasn't just about accountability, it was about transformation. About seizing the narrative and turning it into action that resonated far beyond the office walls. I passed colleagues in the lobby. Some tentative, some openly curious. Their eyes lingered, a mix of admiration and uncertainty, as if wondering whether the storm I'd unleashed would spare them or elevate them. I met a few smiles, quiet nods of solidarity that fueled my resolve. The weight of representation pressed against my chest. As a black woman in corporate America, each victory was a beacon for countless others who had been overlooked, dismissed, or silenced. The boardroom awaited. Cameras had been set up strategically, capturing angles that would tell the story visually as well as audibly. The journalists from yesterday were back, and their presence was now routine. The hum of microphones and rolling cameras a soundtrack to my rising momentum. Marcus entered first, his usual composure cracked, revealing a hint of vulnerability I had not expected to see. He knew that the playing field had shifted irreversibly. Behind him, the executive team followed, some hesitant, some defiant, all cognizant that this was a turning point. I took my place at the head of the table, letting my posture convey authority and calm. The silence was almost unbearable, but I embraced it, channeling the tension into focus. My eyes swept across the room, landing briefly on each individual, silently conveying, this is the moment where truth triumphs, where accountability transforms into empowerment. I began with clarity, layering my points with precision. Redwood has a choice, I said, voice steady, firm, a choice between maintaining appearances or embodying integrity, between preserving comfort for the few or creating equity for all. Each word landed like a hammer striking steel. The board absorbed it, the cameras captured it. The message was unambiguous. Then came the crescendo, the undeniable evidence of malpractice, inefficiency, and covert manipulations, each slide and chart punctuated by my commentary. Marcus attempted to interject, but I silenced him with a look, quiet, commanding, absolute. The room vibrated with tension, a cinematic tableau of confrontation where power, morality, and justice converged. Change is not easy, I continued, locking eyes with the CEO. But it is necessary, and it starts here, with accountability, transparency, and courage. My tone softened, yet carried weight, bridging authority with empathy. This is bigger than any one of us. It is about every employee whose dedication has been taken for granted. Every voice that has been muted. Every individual who deserves respect and recognition. I could feel the shift. The subtle nods from the executive team. The journalists leaning in, pens poised. The weight of cultural resonance, the unspoken acknowledgement of Black excellence and resilience, hung in the air. This wasn't just a corporate victory, it was a narrative victory. A reclaiming of dignity, agency, and voice. Marcus finally spoke, voice strained. Zaria, you've forced a reckoning none of us could ignore. I've only illuminated what already existed. I replied, unwavering. Integrity doesn't need my permission. It only demands recognition and action. My words were deliberate, rhythmic, cinematic, the cadence of triumph anchored in principle. The board agreed to immediate reforms, restructuring departments, implementing oversight committees, revising internal policies, and establishing mentorship programs to uplift underrepresented voices. I watched, heart racing, as justice transformed from abstract concept to tangible action. Each decision was a step toward a culture that valued accountability and equity above all else. Later, standing outside the building, the city stretched before me. Alive with possibility, I allowed myself a moment of quiet reflection. The journey had been grueling, weeks of strategizing, sleepless nights, navigating betrayal and corporate gamesmanship. Yet here I stood, victorious not because I sought revenge, but because I had fought for what was right, elevating not just myself but every colleague who had ever doubted their place in the corporate hierarchy. I thought of every black office worker who had ever felt invisible, whose ideas had been stolen, whose presence had been questioned. Today, my victory was theirs. My voice had become a beacon, a symbol that excellence, integrity, and courage could not only survive but thrive amidst adversity. And in that quiet, cinematic moment, I realized, empowerment is not granted, it is claimed. It is the reclamation of agency in a system designed to minimize it. It is the courage to confront, to expose, and to transform. It is the ability to stand tall, even when the world whispers that you shouldn't. The story of Redwood had changed. The story of Zaria had changed. And the story of every black professional watching, listening, waiting for someone to validate their struggles, had changed too. I walked forward, chest lifted, shoulders squared, each step echoing not just through the building, but through the corridors of possibility itself. Today, integrity prevailed. Today, voices were amplified. Today, justice wasn't a concept, it was a reality I had helped create. And as the city lights reflected off the glass, a subtle grin tugged at my lips. The fight wasn't over, but the victory was undeniable, cinematic, and profoundly, deeply transformative. If there's one thing Zaria's journey teaches us, it's this: courage isn't loud, it's consistent. It's showing up every day, even when the office politics are against you. It's speaking truth to power, even when no one else will. Every challenge she faced, every betrayal, wasn't just an obstacle. It was fuel to refine her vision, sharpen her strategy, and rise stronger than before. And here's the part that hits me the most. This isn't just her story. It's the story of anyone who's had to fight for their voice, their space, their respect at work. It's about standing tall, staying true, and creating change, not just for yourself, but for everyone who comes after you. If Zaria's story spoke to you, tap that like button. Let people know you stand for fairness. Share this video to lift someone who's been through the same struggles at work. Remind them they're not alone. And drop your story in the comments. How have you turned challenges into your strength? Let's start a conversation. Let's rise together. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of resilience, courage, and workplace empowerment, because your voice matters, and your story could inspire someone else today.